The temperature is nice and warm in the Boiling Point podcast studio, so come on in, get cozy, and let's enjoy the conversation. We empower leaders through thoughtful discussions to positively impact our world. Our host, Dave Vale, founder and CEO of Vision Coaching Inc., is highlighting how we can thrive in business communities. Our conversations with leaders, entrepreneurs, and inspirational storytellers are shining a spotlight on empowerment. Joining Dave this week is our special guest host, Emily Roger. Let's join the conversation with Dave and Emily.
All right, so welcome back to the Boiling Point. I am here with my co-host, Emily. Emily, good to have you back. We took a little bit of a hiatus, and maybe you can. In the last interview, we talked. We had a really interesting conversation with Marcel LeBrun. And you talked a lot about, we started by just talking about the fact that you just finished an ultra marathon. And I'm wondering, since that last conversation, so long ago, are you still going to do this next ultra marathon?
I am. Yep. 4 weeks away.
And your body is going to be healed up and ready to roll?
Yeah, I think so. I was just kind of dealing with a little tendonitis in my ankle after that last one, but I think that is all healed. And I think it's not really until, I get out there to then fully see how it is that I feel. So as of now, it's a go.
Wow. Okay. And where's the next one going to be?
It is in Arizona.
Okay.
And I chose Arizona just because of having, so many races there for cycling and kind of closing that chapter and now wanting to possibly reopen that chapter, but just in a different way and kind of seeing how my experience is different in a climate and a state that I love so much and have so many memories of to create different memories in.
Yeah. Well, so maybe you can share just, if you can, quickly, what that state means to you and maybe some of your past for people that haven't watched, documentaries and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So I got into sport, bike racing at the age of 27 with no athletic background. Just didn't have the opportunity really to do so growing up. And so I did my first ever bike race at the age of 27 in Arizona. And, since went on to have a lot of success in the sport and a lot of hardships as well with both of my accidents, getting hit by vehicles. And so I think that racing in Arizona, it was one of the first times that I really was able to tap into the strength that I had, really find my perseverance, my resilience, and it gave me confidence and skill sets that I learned on the bike and through triathlon that I've now been able to take through so many other aspects of my life. And now kind of experimenting with a new sport and being able to kind of apply those same lessons that the bike taught me just to different areas of life. So, I think that's why it's important for me to go back there.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and you're applying it also to executive coaching, and that's, with the stuff you've been doing with leaders.
Yeah.
Which I find really interesting because that intersection of leadership and sport and, those life lessons that we learn and how we can share some of our learnings from sport, with when we're working with executive. I find it's kind of it's a neat intersection, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And the different ways that we're inspired to tap into different aspects of ourselves. And and the ideas that come to us when we are in, whether it's exercising or doing something that for me, exercise is almost like creative. It kind of sparks that creativity. And so putting ourselves in this position where our minds can't just flow with whatever ideas come to us, whatever insights or awarenesses come to us, but that we have to put ourselves into those spaces in order to then be able to create them.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, I'm not inspired enough to do an ultramarathon, but I appreciate you sharing the experience, and I am with you in spirit in 4 weeks from now in Arizona. Let's bring in our next guest. So this is really interesting because in our last conversation with Marcel LeBrun, works with Huddle and Acadian Broadcasting, he interviews all these leaders and people. And we asked them who inspires you? And then he actually brought up the guest we're about to introduce. And so I'd like to, it was serendipity. I'd like to say Marcel, we chased you down and we said, we got to talk to Marcel because Marcel LeBrun had just talked about you. That wasn't the case. It worked out perfectly. So welcome, Marcel. I would love for you to introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, and thanks for having me back. I don't know how long it was the last time we chatted. Quite a while ago. Yeah. So Marcel LeBrun, I'm a maritimer for the most part. I lived here since I was 12 years old, and I've been a software and tech entrepreneur most of my career. But I now am more focused on philanthropy and social justice issues, and I'm the founder of a tiny home community that focuses on geared to income housing in Fredericton called 12 Neighbours. And but I'm still involved as well in tech, so I'm involved in coaching a few younger CEOs and a few little tech companies here and there. And I have an Arizona story, so just to connect into your bike story. One day I was in Arizona, in Phoenix, for some meetings with Salesforce.com, which is the company that acquired my company at the time, Radian 6. And we had some meetings starting in the morning. So 3 of us went for a run. And one of my colleagues from Australia and a couple of us from Canada. And then we saw this little trail head off to the side. And it looks like it climbed a bit. So we said, oh, let's go up there. And but unbeknownst to us, we were actually climbing Camelback Mountain. And it was probably around 4:30 or 5 a.m. So we had to use our iPhone lights to be able to see our way up there. And then as we were going up, of course, we couldn't stop because the view just kept getting better and better as we were going to the top of the mountain. So we made it all the way up to the top and then had to really hurry down and arrived a little bit late at our meeting. And then later in the day, somebody said, "You went up Camelback Mountain in the dark?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "That's full of rattlesnakes and scorpions. You're lucky." And I was like, "Oh, we didn't know. We just saw a trail and took it." So that's my Phoenix. That's my Arizona story.
The beauty of being naive to things sometimes, right? If you had known, you wouldn't have got the views of the top.
Well, and we saw the sunrise from the top, so it was really cool.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah, even just flying into Sky Harbor Airport and seeing Camelback Mountain, it's a beautiful place, and beautiful to have those trails that are so central to Phoenix that you can leave your hotel, your resort, wherever it is that you're staying, and that there's a trailhead right there.
Yeah, and hit them accidentally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do love that comment of being naive. Like it's a real gift in some ways.
Totally.
Like you go to some place and the locals say, why'd you go there? And you're like, oh, I'll never go back. But at the time, you didn't know any better. So
that's how I do it. That's how I do everything.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. You mentioned, Marcel, you moved here when you're 12. Like, where were you before? Just out of curiosity.
Oh yeah, I grew up in southern Ontario, a little town called Cornwall, which is a pulp mill, kind of industrial town. And I moved here, my father's work is how we ended up moving here. And so I went to middle and high school in Moncton, and then I've lived in Moncton, Fredericton, and St. John. So I went to UNB in Fredericton, and then I started my career working in St. John, and then ended up back in Fredericton.
So you've done the circuit.
I have
done the circuit. Okay. Well, I'm always curious about how people arrive here, because I didn't arrive here until I was, 29 years old. But it feels like home. But as I'm reminded, even though I have a family from here and kids born here, I come from away. Always will be. But man, I love this. I love this region. It's just amazing. And what one of the things that drew me to it is, and I don't know if people outside of New Brunswick or Atlantic Canada would necessarily understand this, but there's a real entrepreneurial streak here, and I think you're a great example of that, Marcel. How did you get into the entrepreneurial world and the tech world? Like because you kind of briefly mentioned Radian 6. It's a pretty significant story in terms of what you guys accomplished. But I'm just curious, like, what's the backstory to getting into tech and the entrepreneurial world?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, there's two things that converged. I got into tech just because I always liked building things. And so whether it was Lego as a kid or making go-karts or doing whatever, I just liked to build things. And, I had this little Radio Shack electronics 401 kit, when I was a kid, and you could make radios and things like that. And so I thought I liked, electrical, and I liked the idea of solving problems and whatnot. But entrepreneurship in particular wasn't on my radar at all. So I went to engineering school, and the view was that I wanted to build stuff. But what I'd say is I became an entrepreneur somewhat by accident, because, I saw some opportunities and said, oh, why don't I try solving this problem? And someone else came along and said, hey, this would make a good company. Maybe we should make a company out of this. And then I kind of fell into that. And then I discovered that too is building. And so I enjoyed building companies, and of course, a lot more challenges with that, because it's got lots of human factors involved and everything. But I really enjoyed it, and I just kind of continued to do that in my career. But I have all my business training just came on the fly.
Mm. Yeah. And Marcel, I listened to you speak, I guess a week and a half, almost 2 weeks ago now, at the L'Arche event in St. John. And I could have listened to, it was like, when it was over, I was like, oh, I could have listened to you speak for so long. And I love hearing you saying that you're, working with new CEOs and leaders now and coaching, because in listening to you speak was like, wow, this guy has coaching presence. And just, listening to your thoughts on things, your way of doing things. And I think this will kind of lead us into what it is that you are doing now, which very much about building things. And, I just, that you listening to you was so impactful, and you had all eyes in the room were on you and focused.
Well, also, a few eyes were on our mayor, our community member. It was really enjoyable that I got to come and we had a table, and we got to bring our first 6 community members who moved in to our community, all of whom, a year earlier would have been living rough. And so to have them all together at an event like this at a table, and then to have Al get up and kind of share his story a little bit was a really special night for me. Yeah,
you could see that. Yeah, absolutely.
I want to learn more about that. Before we jump into that, though, I just, one of the things that Mark brought up was, he mentioned you and some others having, real success and being drawn to the fact that you mentioned being a philanthropist, and wanting to give back. Because, what could happen is someone can have, a lot of, and some people do have a lot of success, as you would have in terms of Radiant 6. I'd love maybe you can share with the audience like what that became, and this whole sale to Salesforce, which I think is one of the, if not the biggest in Atlantic Canada, exit. But the fact that you didn't leave, you didn't take off, you've kind of more than doubled down. And one of your colleagues that I run across all the time, David Alston, he's just a big part of this, the fabric of this community as well. And I go with my family to Timber Tops, do the zip line, and I always see David. He's sitting out there, and I'm like, "Hey, David, how you doing?" And it's just funny. Like he's just part of the. He's like one of the trees there. You know what I mean? Right. It's that whole community-minded piece that I find really remarkable. But for listeners that aren't familiar with Radiant 6, maybe you can give them that backstory in terms of what that meant to the tech community in this part of the world.
Yeah, I mean, Radiant 6 was a software company founded in 2006. The founder his name is Chris Newton. He was also the founder of Q1 Labs, which IBM acquired actually a short time after Salesforce acquired Radiant 6. And Chris Newton's one of these guys who reads a lot and sees trends. And this was in the early days of the disruption in marketing caused by social media. And he just observed how the paths of information flow were changing. How people were becoming aware of things or being influenced were changing, and that companies were spending all their money on these old channels to influence people, and everything was moving to this new world of social, and that surely businesses are going to be interested in understanding what's being said on those channels. And that was kind of the root of Radian 6, which was, how can we help companies understand what the voice of their customer is? And so we built that business, and it was a great product, a great team, and good timing. And we were able to really execute on building a product and growing sales to the point where, we had a couple thousand customers, including well over half of the Fortune 500. So a lot of the really big brands in the world, from, Pepsi and Nestle and large tech brands, Dell Computer, others, were using our product. And then that led to a number of partnerships, and one that was quite strong was with Salesforce.com, who is one of the fastest growing software companies in the world. Actually got to 10 billion in revenue faster than Oracle and Microsoft, but it's lesser known because they're on the enterprise side of things, not a consumer company. And they really had a dominant position in customer service and in customer relationship management. And we're seeing marketing technology start to take off. So we began some discussions, and that led to their acquisition of Radian 6 in 2011, which was, for 2011, was the largest tech exit in Canada that year. So that was a big deal for our region, to have a market leader like Salesforce and acquire a company that's based here, and then to continue to grow it within Salesforce as kind of the cornerstone of the what became the marketing cloud, or the marketing business unit. Yeah, so that's a bit of the background.
That's great. Well, and it gave, I feel like, a story like that gives other entrepreneurs the confidence that you can actually do that from this part of the world. That was my sense, and because and you mentioned QN Labs, like, and these are some names that in this part of the world are thrown around quite a bit as here's examples, but it's like you need that example almost to
it takes away the doubt, that things like that don't happen here. Well, they do. And so it takes that away. There's actually, if anyone's interested, there's an interesting book that was written about the whole story of Q1 and Radian 6 by Gordon Pitts. It's called Unicorn in the Woods, and it's quite entertaining. Yeah. And he kind of tells that whole story of, how it came about. Yeah. So sorry, Emily, you were going to go down this. So I think that backstory is so interesting, because again, so Marcel and others, could have taken off to some exotic part of the world, but they chose to stay here and are doing really interesting things. And you got to witness that the other night, talking about 12 Neighbours project.
Yeah. And I feel like there can be so many, well, and before that, but even, Marcel, hearing about the, of sharing your story, of then showing people that, these things can happen. And that so often we think of like, oh, it's the Maritimes, it's a smaller town, or it's only Fredericton, or only, but it's like that those things do not limit us in any way. And even just that interest in building things, in whether it's Lego, whether it's go-kart, whether it's like, again, tapping into that creativity and those interests that you have. And when you stay true to those passions, of what can possibly happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's, interesting about that is there's a few, I think the disproportionate, if you look at the purpose of business, traditionally a lot of people look at it as, okay, it's a vehicle to go make money and create wealth. But really the purpose of business is to improve the state of the world. It's all relationship. I make a table and I'm proud of it, and it's nice and crafty, and then I sell it to somebody, and in some ways the root of what Radiant 6 was about is how mass marketing had kind of depersonalized and dehumanized a lot of things, and that social was kind of rehumanizing business. In some ways, I think there is a general movement that more and more people are recognizing that, business is not here just to extract, but to give. And so to me, a transition into philanthropy, which, by the way, I love the definition of, because most people have a mistaken notion of the word philanthropy. They think of as giving money. When they say, oh, this is a philanthropist, it's someone who gives money. But the word phileo and anthropos means love people. And so it's love people is what the word means. And that's way more complex and layered than giving money. And I think that kind of reclaiming that word for what it should be, I think is really an interesting thing to me. And in some ways, it's kind of what the purpose of business is. In a big picture, if your business is important to our community, then it brings value. It improves our community. So a lot of the Radiant 6 crew, you'd be surprised. There's kind of, I'd say, a disproportionate percentage of people that are focusing on things that are more led by the mission versus led by the, let's say, the financial objective. Yeah.
I was really, like when you speak that, I think of our mutual friend, all of us in Greg Hemmings, and and his being ambassador of the B Corp movement, and and just it just really resonates with I think a number of us that got into business, whether it's in tech or kind of in the coaching service that we offer or whatever it may be. I always wonder, like, because I remember early days when I was, I wasn't a good employee, so I just kind of found I had to be self-employed. So that's how things evolved for me. And then I, started a company and I got into this coaching business and started vision coaching. And one of the things that came back to me was people would say, yeah, Dave, you might be a little too nice for business. And I always thought, like, what does that say about people's view of business? Like, you have to be cutthroat, and you have to be, and I always wonder, like, where does that come from? Because, in talking to you and the success you've had, that doesn't come across. In fact, you seem exactly the opposite, in terms of loving people and giving back.
It's a really good observation. I think if you do look at things statistically, there are a large number of successful companies that are led by people that you would probably call not very nice. Let's just put it that way. And, I think they can have a measure of success, but I don't think it's by any means the norm, or definitely not, necessary. I think that generally, leaders are very are very skilled at execution and focused on execution. And sometimes when you're focused on that, there's people that can get injured or, hurt along the way. So there tends to be a little bit of sometimes in business leaders, a little bit of a pendulum swing toward the mission. But in my experience, like, the things I love the most when I reminisce about Radiant 6, it's not actually the business success or the financial success that we had, but it's the fact that people say, oh, that's never been replicated in my career. I've never had a job like that since. That was really amazing. That I enjoy hearing a lot more than whatever, dollar impact it might have had. So I think in the total sense of impact, I think that you can be a strong leader and a nice guy. I think nice guy, nice woman, man, woman, whatever. It's not the the cutthroat leaders that win, for sure.
Amen.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then, so then to kind of, tie in the 12 neighbors and speaking on just community and building community. And I love that you gave that definition of philanthropy. Because it's like, I see so much of it. It's just giving, and giving money. Yet I see what you're doing. And it is like, no, you're not just like providing like just that development or just giving them the means. Like you're actually loving people, caring for people and getting to know what it is that they need to then be able to assist with that. So can you share for the listeners who may not know, although I feel like everybody knows, but of what 12 Neighbours is?
Yeah, well, on the surface, 12 Neighbours looks like an affordable housing community focused on helping people who've been experiencing homelessness to be housed. But what I say is that we're really an organization whose mission is helping people overcome barriers to a full and independent life, and housing is the starting point. But how I got there was, again, back to kind of my engineering mind and problem solving, is I remember meeting an individual a number of years ago called Rick Tobias, who worked at Yonge Street Mission in Toronto as the CEO for about 30 years. He just passed away this year, actually. And he was speaking at a justice conference. And someone asked him, what advice do you have for young people who, want to help, want to make a difference? And he got very emotional. And he said, I'm really proud of the work that we've done in the last 30 years. We've helped a lot of people, but we haven't really changed our city. We haven't really changed anything in the city. So my advice is, maybe you shouldn't just do the things we've been doing, but maybe you have to think about this whole thing a bit differently. And that really got me going, because I saw that around me. I saw, wow, there's so much effort that just keeps getting poured out and poured out and poured out. And supposedly that is helpful, but it doesn't change anything. So who's doing the best job of actually changing things? And so that started me on a lot of research and visiting places to try and understand who's doing work such that when you come back in 5 years, the place is different and people are different. And it's not just the same as it always is, or even worse. And I found those places, and I kind of tried to synthesize, all those lessons into what we're trying to build here in Fredericton with 12 Neighbours. And that's why I say that we're really focused on helping people overcome barriers to an independent life, not just housing. But housing is a really important starting point, And you mentioned get the idea of giving. I would say and you probably heard me say this in St. John, but we're kind of addicted a little bit in the West to this mindset of okay, I just give a few dollars, or I drop a can in a box, or things like that, and it feels immediate, it feels good, and somehow we don't know what else to do. So we do a lot of that. We do a lot of emergency relief, and we're pretty good at crises. And I think, governments in some ways are better at dealing with crises than actual long-term change or development. So we go, oh, we have all these people that are outside and winter's coming. What are we going to do? So that's a crisis. So we say, well, let's find a building and let's put some beds in it. Okay, great. All right. We just created 20 beds. Okay. But next year you're going to need 30, and next year you're going to need 40. So investments in crisis relief, always increase the demand for crisis relief, because they normalize that way of living. It kind of says, hey, it's okay that you're living outside and winter's coming, and we're going to put you in this place. And it's like all of a sudden, oh, should that be my experience every year? That I live this way? And the answer is no. But if you continue to invest in the emergency relief, you're kind of saying, yes, it is. So we really focus on long-term development, and that's a lot harder. It's way harder to do than relief. Relief is easy. You drop in, you do your thing, and you drop out. But development is really hard work.
I love the holistic approach you're taking, right? And I think it's easy for people. Well, I just wonder, like, how many people just don't maybe understand fully what someone who's homeless has gone through. And I believe, and there's certain kind of ways of thinking that maybe just alleviates, that person from maybe feeling too much. But it's like, well, they've caused this themselves, or they don't work hard enough, or whatever it may be. And I had the good fortune when I lived in Vancouver. I worked with young offenders, and I worked with coming out of jail. And some of the stories I would hear, just I couldn't help but think, like, they're not that much different than me. If anything, I just by a stroke of good fortune, I happened to be in a family that had some stability, or whatever it may have been, right? What are you learning about some of the stories that people that are actually going to be, participating or being involved in 12 Neighbours? Like, what did you learn from that perspective around some of the barriers that people are up against that maybe some of us wouldn't fully appreciate?
Yeah. Well, it seems like you open that door and it's like there's quite a deep, well of layers of learning. And, to understand the degree of trauma that some individuals have been through, and that they're surviving to the extent that they are, is actually quite incredible. I mean, there's people that, others might look at them as, fairly stuck and have no idea what they've carried, what they've had to carry, what they've punched through, what they've survived. So yes, there are often multiple co-occurring cause and effect issues in people's lives. They all are consequential and causal at the same time. So substance use, mental health, poverty, homelessness. Homelessness causes mental health issues. Mental health issues cause homelessness. Homelessness causes, substance use. Substance use causes homelessness. They're all, interrelated, but often it's trauma that was the starting point, some kind of trauma, and then it kind of compounds. And, homelessness in and of itself is a trauma, and substance use, addiction is a trauma, and so the things that are consequences of the trauma are also traumatizing. So there's a long path for people to overcome those issues. But what I've learned is that, when you look at the individual, you see someone who's, I like one of my favorite persons I learned from, a fellow called Del Seymour, they call him the mayor of the Tenderloin district in San Francisco. And he says, well, we don't give people dignity. He goes, they already got it. They just forgot which pocket they put it in. So we just remind them which pocket they put it in, and it's this notion where we think somehow, it's up to us to bestow, dignity on somebody or skill or whatever. But a lot of the ingredients are there, but they've been kind of scarred and covered over. And the way and the narrative that others have about them is also connected to the narrative that they have about themselves.
Wow.
So if you, experience poverty of circumstance long enough, it starts to become a poverty of identity. I met this woman, and a Filipino woman in Calgary who ended up homeless, her and her husband, and she had to, she found herself in food bank lines. And one day she said, well, I'm here, I must deserve this, So there was the start of the circumstances changing the identity narrative. And then it further developed into, I don't know that I can ever work again. where she held a very successful job just a year later, but had a child and a mental health challenge and a loss of job and a bunch of compounding issues. And it just kind of cycled from there. And what it took is somebody coming alongside of her, accepting her, not asking her to be defined by her deficits, and to uncover her strengths. And so we talk about being strength-based. So rather than when you ask somebody, what happened? Tell me your story. What you're saying is, the most defining characteristic about you is something bad that happened. So that's why I'm asking that question. What if you start with asking and uncovering strengths? It's like, oh, I'm not used to that question. Well, maybe that's the thing I see the most. And so learning to see those things and learning to, I guess, become kind of an archaeologist of, the person that was, that's just kind of like an archaeologist sees the artifact, even though it's all covered over in dust, and knows how to delicately take it off. And all of a sudden everybody sees, it is beautiful. There it is. It's kind of like that's the job, but it's a tough job because, sometimes when people are injured, they do things that don't appear to make sense. Why would you do that? And it does make sense when you see what they've had to do to survive. But it takes a lot of work and a lot of patience for sure. But it's hugely rewarding, when you see people 100%. move ahead.
Yeah. And, in you talking about the narrative that others hold up against us and that we can hold up against other people, and how quick we can be to judge and how quick we can be to judge ourselves. And, even being at the LARSH event of that, where it is, supporting community and creating community for people with intellectual disabilities. And, that's like near and dear to my heart, as I have my oldest sister has Down syndrome and now dementia. And just this thing of like, when we break down the narratives that we hold about people, and when we really tap into and help them see their strengths of just what is possible for individuals, for people to be able to live on their own, to support themselves, to integrate into the community. But so often we can easily not, based on the narrative that we're holding up against them, and that then just because becomes a part of our identity. And something that really stood out to me when you were speaking was about the winning the lottery and how we can win. And I'll have you touch on that, because I think it was just a powerful thing to say, but how even just being born into a certain family is winning a lottery. Living in Canada, we're winning the lottery.
Yeah, I first heard that concept from an individual who's a Jesuit priest in LA called Father G. They call him Greg Boyle, and he works with ex-gang members. And he said, these fellas in here, they didn't win the zip code lottery. They didn't win the parent lottery. They didn't win the education lottery. They didn't win any lottery. And, I think a lot of people have the mistaken notion that, somehow if we're successful, it's because we've worked hard and made smart decisions and things like that. And, it's generally true that good things come if you work hard, but that's not the whole picture. And we forget that even the ability to work hard is a gift, that you received, that not everyone has received. And, many other things are received. And so when you look at people who are, received very little of those, we'll say, kind of building blocks, how do you expect any different outcome? I met gang members in LA who were, doing break and enters at 3 years old. Their father would break the window, put the kid through the window, get the kid to unlock the front door. And then the kids would escape into gang life as young as they could, just to get away from the situation in their home, and just would go from that to prison to jail and just was born into that lifestyle. So then someone comes along and says, why would you do that? Why would you choose this? And they go, because I don't have a choice.
Yeah.
Doesn't appear to be a choice. So not all choices are the same. I think we look at people and say, why would they choose that? But not all choices are the same. So it's important to keep that perspective.
I think that's, one of the biggest gifts that I got from my parents at a young age is just that recognition that I never used that language, or I love that language on the lottery, but it was clear that, they were suggesting that I had won a lottery, but don't take that for granted. And somehow, it's just interesting how you could just make all these assumptions had you not had that maybe critical kind of support or having a family that pushed you in a place and say, by the way, you're very fortunate in what you have, and not everyone has this, and by the way, it could all be gone tomorrow, like with any of us, right?
Yeah.
My father did. He was a lawyer, and he did a lot of personal injury work. And I remember we're walking, seeing a homeless person in Vancouver, and at a very young, I was in my early 20s, and feeling bad for this guy. And he said, we're only one car accident away from that, Dave. And then he shares a story about a client of his, and it was just so impactful for me just to recognize, okay, that could be anyone, because it's just so, and I think that's what you're sharing, and with that recognition, doesn't it make it easier to appreciate where maybe someone's coming from, and that they maybe, they didn't have the right lottery ticket?
The other thing that comes to mind as you share that is there could be, you hear that a lot. People go, oh, this could be worse. You could be worse. You could be that. You could be that. And, all of a sudden at one point, I'm like, wait a minute, something feels a little bit off with that thinking. And what it is, it's a sense that we have that, okay, this is what good looks like. And I could have it bad, but is bad? And I'll kind of elaborate a little bit. Like I went through this learning a little bit in my own personal experience a few years ago, because I was quite sick for a year with a concussion, so I couldn't do anything. I could barely shower. I basically spent my days in the dark, just trying to get through. And at some point on that journey, my mindset changed from kind of focusing on all the things I had lost to focusing on all the things that I had that day. And so instead of saying, oh man, I can only walk for 5 minutes and then I'm done, I could change and choose to be thankful that I can walk for 5 minutes, because I couldn't a few weeks ago. So I'm going to make the best use of that 5 minutes. And so we might look at other people and go, oh, they have this and this. Boy, I'm not them. I'm thankful. But really, is it your circumstances that dictate your experience in life, or is it your choices and your relationships, and things like that? So you talk about your sister, Emily, you could focus on her declining capabilities, cognitive capabilities, but really it's a relationship, that matters. And so you focus on that relationship. And so I think it's what challenged me in that is when I look at people and where they're at, I don't have a picture of where they all need to be. It's not up to me to say, oh, your life will be full if you can only get over here. No, not necessarily, it may be that, there's community members in our community that may never get to a point where they can hold down employment, but maybe they can still live a full life, with that. And that's okay. So I don't want to impose, my notion of what good looks like. So that's another thing I kind of had to learn to let go of a little bit. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Marcel. Like I can't imagine how tough that would go through, and and I'll talk about it as a takeaway. But this idea of appreciative inquiry, like that, it's a simple concept to maybe understand, but to practice it like that, like at least for myself, I could be so much better. Even when things are relatively good,
Well, and sometimes you have to be forced to.
Yeah.
It's not something we choose to, and that's why, interestingly, the people who've been through the most difficulty tend to have some of the most amazing character traits and gifts, because of what they've been through. And so when you hang out with people who've been through a lot, you tend to see that.
This conversation could go on for a long time. Emily, like Marcel, like I appreciate how sharing you are, like in terms of how giving you are, I should say, and sharing your personal stories and what you're doing, and it helps me understand maybe why you've thrown yourself into 12 Neighbours. And just before we conclude here, could you describe what the project's actually specifically doing? Some of the more tactical things around it. I understand the philosophy behind it, but it'd be really neat to hear this holistic view of it.
Yeah, so we're building a tiny home community. We have 27 homes on the property right now, and we're building 96 homes in total. They're grouped in these. It's a very walkable, bikeable kind of community, not built for cars. It's everyone has a group of 12 neighbors. So the little blocks are 12 houses each. And it's kind of set up with different levels of privacy from, we have people that just stay in their house, and we have people that walk around and know everybody and everything in between. And then we have a team of people that come alongside and help people, challenge them and invite them to think through their goals and how they might be able to, overcome barriers and pursue those goals. And then the third thing we're doing is what I saw in a lot of the places that were very effective is tapping into the power of meaningful work. And so we're building a building called the Social Enterprise Center, which will create low barrier, progressive employment for people, that if all they can do is half day a week, we start with that. But we get people going in things. So we're going to create businesses there, and food, retail, construction, and entrepreneurship. And that project has started and is going to kind of carry through the winter. And right now we're building houses at a rate of one new house per week. And we're going to continue that through to all winter and through to March 2024, when we put house 96 on the property.
Amazing. I'm so disappointed. I didn't get to hear more about this at the Larch dinner.
Well, you have to come on a tour sometime.
I was thinking,
we started doing tours once a month. So we posted on our Facebook page, and people can come and meet the mayor and get a walkthrough and visit a tiny home and stuff like that.
And this is the mayor of 12 Neighbours.
Yeah. He's self-appointed, but we've kind of rolled. We've kind of rolled with it.
Is this Al that you were talking
about?
Yeah.
This is Al. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Al and his fiance Shanda were the third couple to move into our community, and actually Al is just a very good spokesperson, and he likes representing the community, and he does a great job at it. So it's kind of, so we're like, okay, there's his gifts. Let's work with that. Yeah.
We need Al in every community, right?
Yeah, we do.
So, and if people want to learn more about this, Marcel, where do they?
Yeah, you can go to 12neighbours.com, spelled the Canadian way. So OU, NEIGHBOURS. And also Facebook.com/12neighbours. We post a lot of video. So there's a ton of video and pictures on Facebook that, we do regular updates as we're developing the community. It's usually Al and I together doing an update. So it's a lot of content there to find out more about what we're doing.
Awesome. Well, that's you haven't done the tour, Emily. Maybe we can.
No. Yeah, I would love to.
That would be so much fun.
Yeah.
Marcel, thank you so much for sharing your story. And there's so much packed into this last hour. We try to keep these around 45 minutes, and we're well over that. And I think we could go for another hour easily. And what we do now is generally is some takeaways. And I'll just warn you that Emily's takeaways always are way better than my takeaways. And so she'll go first, and she'll go, and I'll go, geez, I wish I thought of that. So I'm just warning you that'll probably happen. That generally happens. So, Emily, what are your takeaways?
Well, what is your takeaway? You go, Dave, in case I have the same one as you.
Yeah, I don't think this time you would. I'm actually writing stuff down because Emily's really kind of caused me to up my game. But what comes to me is I went to this school called Notre Dame in Saskatchewan. It was founded by Father Murray, and the motto was "Luctor e emergo" in Latin, which is struggle and emerge. And I just, when Marcel was saying, talking about some of the very most interesting people are the ones that have had at least this is the way I interpret it, some of the biggest struggles, or right now they're in the middle of that struggle, but that, when you emerge, you in your way, whatever way that is, it's just, your story is so powerful, and you can be so sage, and there's so much wisdom there. And what life is, doesn't have struggle, right? So that's my takeaway, along with just the notion of appreciative inquirer, strength-based, I think is just a brilliant way to go about, kind of philosophically, and also challenging. To keep on, whether it's you as an individual, your kids, or your clients, or whatever you're doing, it's the best way to go. And I find it challenging, very truthfully.
Yeah, and I think mine is around this concept of philanthropy, and that I think that before I would have seen it as that it would have to be someone who is of certain financial value to be a philanthropist, and changing that narrative on that, in that anybody can be a philanthropist. And if you are willing to donate what it is that you do have, and whether that is experience, skill sets, talents, that ultimately, we all have things to give to create the world to be a better place. I think, Marcel, it really is it pulls on my heartstrings to hear the things that you are doing, and the life that you are giving to people, the dignity that you're helping them find about themselves, and the ability to just kind of create that change for them to see themselves differently and see one another differently. And so thank you for that. This has been really awesome.
Yeah, and I always remind people I'm not a downer on giving money. I think it can be very helpful, but it's about like spending yourself, first, and then your money along with it. Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you like that term. Yeah, because it's not out of reach. A lot of people think, I'd never call myself a philanthropist. Got the wrong definition.
Yeah.
Well, you've given us a new definition about loving people. I think it's perfect. I never knew that. I know a bunch of things. Jean-Pierre, who used to work with you, Marcel, is going to help us, do this final chapter on the podcast. In terms of
And I have to say, so I started at Radiant 6 when I was 23. And I didn't think anything, because that was probably only the second or third real job. I didn't think anything of an executive that you could walk into their office, ask any random question, and they would take the time to talk to you, to ask how you were, to answer any questions you have. That's obviously not the norm in business, but I can say, like what Marcel was saying about how everybody, we call it our Radiant 6 family, or our 6 family. It was an experience that I don't think I'll ever have again in my life because of that, just that attitude. And it was about community. It was about giving back. And I've brought a lot of those lessons, been very fortunate to have at times in my life, probably when he didn't realize I needed a motivational message, sometimes had Marcel and Alston and others send those messages through that just makes a difference. And I love seeing what they're doing, and it makes me kind of more inspired to do more in my own community as well. You can go back. We're going to post the original episodes actually that were with Marcel, and they're talking about social entrepreneurship and also about growing as a CEO in the Radiant 6 in different companies. We'll have those linked on this episode, and they're on the boilingpointpodcast.com, and we post everything to our social media channels, so LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and we post the video on YouTube and Facebook.
Oh, and a shout out to David Alston for giving us the name, The Boiling Point, in episode 3 of however many we've done. So that's Marcel's colleague. So merci, Marcel. Appreciate it.
Happy to chat. Enjoyed the discussion. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Boiling Point Podcast. Remember to subscribe and rate our podcasts on your favorite listening platform. To find out more, head to our website at boilingpointpodcast.com. You can connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. To find out more about Dave Vale's work, head over to visioncoachinginc.com. Thanks for listening, and make sure to check out our next conversation.